Hey y'all, Melissa here with you today, and today we're going to be talking about tips for sewing vinyl. I'm going to have a project coming up where we're going to be using clear vinyl to make it, so I thought now would be a good time to talk about some different things you might need to know if you've never sewn vinyl before. Now this is a roll of vinyl, and vinyl comes in different gauges. That's how the thickness of it is measured. So at the store you might commonly find anything from 8 gauge up to 20 gauge. And the bigger the number, the thicker the vinyl. This is 16 gauge vinyl, and you can see it's not entirely stiff, but it definitely does have some body, like it will stand up here. The thinner vinyls are going to droop a lot more. They're going to have a lot less body and they will wrinkle more easily. However, they're also easier to sew because the thicker the vinyl is, the harder it is to sew, particularly around corners or things like that. Thinner vinyls are also nice if you are using them on something like a phone case or something where you still want to use a touch screen through the vinyl. So they all have their places. Just kind of think about which project you're doing and get that kind of vinyl. Now, I tend to use 12 to 16 gauge vinyl the most. So those are kind of all-purpose if you just want to have some on hand. I generally try not to use my scissors to cut vinyl. What you're going to want to do instead is use a mat and a ruler and a rotary cutter. This is a much better and cleaner way to cut vinyl. Just line up the ruler for the line you want to cut, and then you can just slice right through, and you're going to get a nice cut with a nice clean straight edge. As much as possible when you're cutting vinyl, you also want to cut in a continuous stroke, because every time you stop, even if you're doing it with scissors, you have the chance of making that, giving it like a little burr or a bump for where you stop. So long, smooth strokes if you're using scissors. If you have the ability to use a rotary cutter, that is my recommended way to cut. Vinyl, like many materials like leather, once you poke a hole in it, that hole is there. It doesn't go away. It's not like with fabric where if you're stitching in between the threads and you remove the stitching, the threads kind of adjust themselves back to where they were woven. Vinyl, that hole's always going to be there. So my next tip is use wonder clips instead of pins. So these are just little clips you can buy. I'll put a link below to where I got these. And you use them to clip the vinyl, and it won't leave a hole on your vinyl the way it would if you were using pins. If you don't want to buy wonder clips, you can also go to the office supply store, and paper clips or binder clips will also work to hold vinyl together. Sometimes a vinyl can stick, particularly to the bottom of your presser foot on your machine. So I have a tip for that, and that is to have some tissue paper handy when you are stitching. Okay, so if I feed vinyl just straight into the machine with nothing else there, you'll see how it kind of just like doesn't want to go anywhere. Normally, the feed dogs don't have a problem with pulling the vinyl. Generally, if you're having a problem with your vinyl not wanting to go through, it's on the top side of the vinyl. It's between the vinyl and the presser foot is where the sticking usually happens. So you can just take a sheet of tissue paper and you can then stitch and watch it feed much better. And then when you have stitched with tissue paper, when you're done with your seam, you can just pull that and tear it right out of the seam that you made. And then you've just got your stitching left, and it fed through your machine much more easily without you having to fight the machine. One more tip for sewing vinyl: because the holes stay in the vinyl once you have stitched them, I always recommend switching to a longer stitch length. So my machine defaults to a 2.5 millimeter length stitch, and I like to go up to like a 3.5 or a 4 for my stitch length. And you'll see that's going to feed more smoothly through the machine. I'm still going to use the tissue paper though to help make sure that my machine will take this. Now the seam, when it's done with these longer stitches, has a couple advantages. First of all, the tissue paper, if you had to use it, will pull out much more easily from that seam. Super easy to tear out. Secondly, because your stitches are longer, you're not punching quite as many holes in the vinyl, which makes your seam stronger. If you use a shorter stitch length on vinyl and your needle's just punching in the vinyl, that can weaken it, and especially if the vinyl that gets combined with the vinyl not feeding correctly, what you end up doing is just creating like a tear in your vinyl instead of a line of stitching. So it's always a good idea to lengthen your stitches when you're working with vinyl. All right, so there are my best tips for working with vinyl. Cut with a rotary cutter, use clips instead of pins. Keep tissue paper nearby if your vinyl doesn't want to feed through your machine. You can use it both on top and on bottom, but try it just on top first and that may solve all your problems. And finally, lengthen your stitches as you are sewing. I hope that helps you be successful with your vinyl projects.